Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this large Railway Shooty Boi. This is the Dragon 144th scale mini-armour German railway gun Leopold. This kit comes in two pretty much identical versions, one that's intended to be Panzer Grey and one in a more desert camo scheme as depicted on the box. Mine is the Panzer Grey version. The way you can tell is the little sticker at the bottom left. Mine is grey. You can assume that means it's the grey version. If it was yellow, it would be the desert version. It seems simple, and it is. The other way to tell is by looking at what's in the box. The sprues we find in the box are fairly numerous. There are two like this which have the sides for the main portion of the gun carriage, and this one also has the lower section of the gun. The other sprue is the same, minus that gun part. For the most part, these parts are fairly decent, but you'll see there is a bit of flash around the place. It's not the worst flash I've ever seen, but it is there, as are the mold lines. I guess flash is really just extended mold lines. The point is, there is going to be a bit of cleanup needed with this kit, more than some other kits, but definitely less than others. There's a few small parts, which can be a little bit tricky to clean up if they've got a particularly chunky mold line on them, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. The way the sprues are in this kit does make them look a little bit messy. By that I mean how a lot of the parts aren't in a complete frame. It doesn't really matter, and I assume it uses less plastic, so that's a good thing. And the thing we're looking at is the actual parts themselves, and those are pretty good. The main issue is that there is some bending, primarily on pieces of sprue that we don't really need, but the thicker end part of the main gun here is also a bit warped. It's kind of hard to see in the pictures, and I will mention it a bit later as well. I would say the sprue with the figures and ammo is probably the worst in the kit. You can clearly see that bending I was talking about. I'm sure the figures are actually fine after a little bit of cleanup, and I was never going to use them in the first place, so personally I wasn't overly concerned about this. It does look like the important parts are nice and neat, and while they will need some cleanup, they do look good. I've no idea how accurate the detailing in this kit is, but it does look fairly detailed. You have to remember though that this is 144th scale, so it's definitely small, and for various reasons, some of the finer details are likely to be omitted, which is fine. Because this is a rail vehicle, it would make sense that there's some track for this to sit on, and there is. Two straight sections and a curve. I'm not entirely sure the curve should be in this set. It's not shown in the instructions at all, but I won't complain about some free track, even though I don't really have a use for it. The other kit includes a set of points, and those would be intended to allow the gun to traverse. I'm assuming this curve is to function in the same way, though the two straight sections is certainly enough for this model anyway. As you can see, these tracks are everything moulded into the part, so the ballast doesn't quite look as convincing as if you'd used tiny rocks, but it's still pretty good, and I think it'll paint up well. Here's the decals. It's a bit hard to see the white markings on the light blue backing paper, but they do look to be pretty decent decals. And here are the instructions. These are pretty simple. It's just one small sheet. It's not really that complicated a model, so you don't need a whole big book of instructions, though I will say that a little bit more information would have been helpful. Something else is that none of the diagrams have any labeling. The parts on the sprues do have numbers, but that's not reflected in the instructions, and that's kind of annoying. Most of the parts are obvious and identifiable by shape, but some of them did pose a bit of a challenge. Not enough that the model couldn't be completed, but it was a little annoying in places. Anyway, let's glue some bits of plastic together. I start with the trucks. These are large 6-wheel trucks and might as well be entire wagons in their own right, but they're not. Or maybe they are. These are pretty easy to put together. There's a little framey thing that goes up into the bottom of the main part, and it does have a particular way it should go. I make sure that it stays there by applying glue around the areas where the parts make contact. Then, wheels. It's really nice that these come as one big set. It would be a bit annoying to have to line up every single set of wheels. The ends of the trucks, or wagons, or would you call them bogies? Whatever you call them, I add the ends next. Both of these assemblies are different. The first one just has a single end part that goes on nice and easy. The other one has a thing. I don't know what it is, maybe some sort of control or something. It goes into place in the small rectangular recess at the end of the wagon, and then the end part goes on. This one is different to the other end, but it still fits pretty much exactly the same way. Next, I install this little step thingy onto the side of the assembly, and this is just as easy as it looks. You may notice that there are now buffers on the wagon, and they didn't just appear there, I installed them, but I forgot to film it for the first bogie thing. I did video it for the second set being installed though, so I'm sure you're all pleased by that. It's not a difficult thing to do, but you should be careful with them. It's really easy to nudge them out of place while handling the model. Now it's time to work on the gun. I start by sandwiching this, I guess it's a recuperator cylinder. It goes between the two breech and trunnion, bits. As you can probably tell, I'm very knowledgeable about what the names of these parts are. Anyway, the cylinder does go on in a particular way, and then you press the two parts together. Nothing too challenging here. At what will be the bottom of the assembly, I add this thing, which is presumably some sort of mechanism relating to gun elevation. I do like that this is one part, but it is a little bit bendy. That's probably not going to be a huge issue, and it is mostly going to be hidden anyway. There's a pin to hold this part in place, and you will need to trim that back a bit later. For now though, I would suggest not gluing this until after it's on the model. Same with these, which I guess are actually the trunnions. They can simply be pressed into place on the gun here. Gluing these now would make it impossible to adjust the gun elevation later. Here's the part of the gun that joins to the assembly that we've already got. This is the bent part I mentioned earlier. It's not a huge bend, but it's definitely visible, and it becomes a bit more obvious when you add the long part of the gun. It's not great, and I'm not sure if this is something common to this kit, or just an error specific to my individual kit, but whatever the case, it's not that good, is it? It's not bad enough to stop me from finishing the kit though, so I move on. I glue the two sections of the gun together, and this is very simple. When gluing that part of the gun onto the base assembly, you do have to line up the framey, ribby details, whatever you might call those. You can see here how the gun just doesn't quite look right. It does depend on the angle at which you view it, and you could probably fix this, maybe by applying some heat and bending the part so that it's a bit straighter, or maybe just using sheer force, but I clearly haven't done anything like that, and I probably won't. I'm not really that worried about it. Moving on, I attach the sides to the frame. I don't know what this is called, but frame seems like an appropriate word. I glue the sides on, and this is pretty simple. You may find you need to apply some pressure to eliminate gaps, but that's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, there's one of these for both sides of the frame. The bottom also needs to be attached, and this was a little bit more difficult. Not horribly difficult, but it didn't just drop into place. This is a long, relatively flexible piece, so it's not a bad idea to glue one end on, apply pressure and make sure the fit is as good as you can get it, and then do the same at the other end. I did have to do a little bit of trimming on one end to get it to fit as best I could, and it didn't end up perfect, but it's good enough. Now it's time to add some of the detailing. First, I add this box, whatever it is, and it goes into a little slot on the top of the left side of the frame. That is left if you look at it as though the gun is facing forward. Just behind that, I add this thing, which looks to me like some sort of cradle for loading shells into the gun. It's pretty simple to get this into place. At the other end, we have what looks to be a travel lock for the gun, and I guess it makes sense that you would want to secure this for transport. You don't really want something like this to be bouncing around, I guess. Next, I glue a very small piece into this thing, which will go on the side of the frame. It took me a while to find this on the sprue. It would have been really helpful if there was some sort of numbering on the instructions. At any rate, I found it and got it into place. I follow that by installing this, what looks like a very large step. This was pretty simple. I follow that with the part that I added the very tiny thing to, and this is also easy to get into place. I think this is a door of some sort, and it looks like it can be closed on the real thing. The box art just shows a door where this thing is. I didn't see an option to model it that way, but I think I would have preferred that. Oh well. Next, I add the ladders. These will be pretty useful for the crew if they want to climb up and work on the gun. I'm not entirely sure I put these on right. It could be that they should sit a little bit higher up. The instructions weren't entirely clear about how these should go on, but they are on, and I guess that's what matters. Next, I put this crane together. I would assume this is mostly for loading shells onto the gun and not hoisting crew members up to the platform. Most of the crane is one piece, but there is a little mechanism that needs to be glued on, and there's keying for this, so it's not too hard to figure out how it should go together. There's also a small wheel that goes on the side here. There is a little nub for that to mount onto, so while it is small, and therefore fiddly, it's not too difficult. I set that aside to bond, and then it's time to work on this big chonk. I assume this is a housing for an engine and various bits of mechanical doodaddery, onto which I glue the end, which has what look to be a couple of exhaust pipes. It could be something else, I guess, but that's what it looks like to me. I did have to apply some pressure, but the exhaust pipes kind of click into place on the side part pretty easily. Then, it can be glued onto this truck, bogie, wagony doover, which has guides on it to help you get this on nice and neatly. The other one doesn't have that, so it should be pretty clear which one to use here. Next, I glue the crane onto its mount. There is a little bit of play to this, so you might have to do a bit of eyeballing and nudging. Gluing this onto the top of the little engine room, or whatever it is, was a little bit less certain. There is a mounting for this hanging off the back of that part, and I've assumed that's meant to line up with the bottom of the crane, so I think I've mounted it properly, but I'm not totally sure. I follow that with some railings. These are thin, and I would imagine they're not difficult to break at all, so be careful with them. You could probably put these on before installing the crane platformy thingy, if you personally find that easier to do, but I feel like it's a better idea to add them now, because there's less chance of breaking them this way. I follow that with more railings. There's a pair of these, one for either side, and there are also fairly obvious mounting points for them, so this should be easy. At the ends, next to the exhausty things, there's another couple of poles, also pretty easy to install. And that's the truck bogie thingies together, so now, why not install the gun into the frame? You've got to fit those toothy lengths into a gap at the end of the inside of the frame, and that's pretty easy. Getting the trunnions into their mounting slots was a little bit more challenging. Once that's all in place, and you've figured out the elevation you want your gun to be at, I add glue to various contact points so that it won't move from that position. Then I install a little cart. I imagine this is just intended as a fun little ride for the crew, and not for something weird like moving ammunition up to the gun. It's obviously pretty simple to glue this down, and I think I've got it facing the right way. And that's the main part of the model done, so why not glue it onto the bogies? Well, I had an issue with the ladders. They protrude a bit further down than the wheels do, which made it kind of hard to sit the main body onto the end parts. The solution was just to clip off the bottom rung of the ladder. I'm sure this is going to cause a bit of rivet counter rage, and I'll have a sensible chuckle at that. Next, I figured maybe I should join the tracks together. There's clip things on the underside that I would imagine hold this together without glue, if that's how you want to go about things. Personally, I believe in the glue god, so I glued it together. The little end caps go on nice and easily, and they kind of make it look like a museum display or something like that. Because it's pretty likely that somebody's going to say something like, "You should make this a running model for your model railway!" And in fairness, this is close to N scale. It's only 4 off, 1/48th scale versus 1/44th scale, but I'm just going to say no. I've got absolutely no interest in putting in the amount of work that would take. The wheels aren't free rolling, and the track is ever so slightly different to N-gauge track. It just won't fit. Also, the pivot points where the bogies join the wagon will definitely not stay together without glue, which I've used here to put them together. Because there isn't much contact area there, I'm sure this will break if you're even slightly rough with it, but it goes together good enough for display purposes, and once the model is glued to the tracks it will probably be fine. It is a little bit difficult to get this onto the rails, so I sat it on the desk to let it bond so that it would do so nice and straight. And that's it. The 28cm railway gun Leopold in 144th scale from Dragon is complete. I'm pretty happy with this, despite the weird bend in the gun. It is a little bit less obvious once everything's all together, and the angle at which you view it can also hide it pretty well, so while I'm sure it'll make some people defecate with rage, I'm not especially bothered by it. I think this is an interesting topic for a model, and I think at this small scale, it's pretty reasonable. Can you imagine how big this thing would be if it was in 35th scale? I don't think that would fit on my desk. Anyway, I think this is pretty cool, and it was mostly a fun kit to build. I completed this in one stream that was around 3 hours. Streaming does obviously include a lot of faffing about, so without that distraction you could probably build it in about half the time, but there's no rush really. While it was fun, I did have a couple of frustrations with this build. The main problem I had was the parts having no labelling on the instructions. That, combined with the diagrams being small, made it a little bit tricky to identify the smallest parts visually, resulting in a confused Herbert, which, in fairness, is not really a difficult thing to achieve, so maybe it's not a huge issue. But I would say that's where most of the difficulty in this kit lies. Not that it's an especially difficult build to begin with, but they don't have to make it harder by omitting labelling. Anyway, I like it, I enjoyed building it, and I think the result is pretty good. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you would like to watch me build kits like this one live on stream, go check out my Twitch channel, the link to which is in the description below. If you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube for the low price of $0? Or if you really like what I do, and you want to help me do Herbert Erpaderp things, as well as seeing videos a bit early before there's any ads, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other, have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.